on cold October 8th, 1976, 16-year-old Teresa Gibson was walking ahead of her classmates. She stopped, stepped off the trail in the Great Smokey Mountains, and was never seen again. But before we get into that, let's rewind a little and see how we got there. I was wanting to do a follow-up video for my first missing 411 when I stumbled across this case. While this case does involve someone going missing in a national forest with no evidence or remains of them to ever be seen again, this one's a little different than your typical missing 411. You'll see when we get there. Teresa Gibson, or Trinny as she was known by her friends, was a 16-year-old sophomore at Bearden High School in Knoxville, Tennessee. She lived with her mother, Hope, and her father, Robert Sr., and her older brother, Robert Jr., as well as her sister, Tina. Trinny seemed like a good kid. She had a job at the mall. She was in horticultural class. She had plans to attend the University of Tennessee and to study landscape architecture. She loved looking at plants and trees. So naturally, Trinny was excited when she found out her class would be taking a field trip to go hiking in the Great Smokey Mountains, specifically near Clingman's Dome, which is about an hour-and-a-half drive away from her school. The morning of the field trip, Trinny had shared a seat on the bus with a senior named Robert Simpson. He was a senior and a very close friend to Trinny's older brother, Robert Jr. Once they arrived at Clingman's Dome on that cold, rainy morning, their teacher, Mr. Dunlap, had explained that they would be hiking from Clingman's Dome to Andrews Bald, then back to the bus. They were told to be back by the bus by 3:30. They were also explicitly told to not hike further than Andrews Bald, not to take any side trails, and not to interfere with any plant or animal wildlife. The 40 students had two chaperones, Mr. Dunlap and the other one being the bus driver, who actually stayed back at the bus the entire time. Hindsight, obviously, this is way too many students for one teacher to chaperone. So the trip began. The students broke off into different groups as they were hiking. They mainly split up on like how fast you could hike. Trinny and Robert, the senior who sat with her, hiked together. Once they made it to Andrews Bald, basically the midpoint of the hike, they decided to stop and take lunch together. After lunch, Trinny was ready to head back to the bus, but Robert wasn't ready to go yet. So Trinny began hiking back alone. As Trinny was hiking back, she quickly called up with another group of fellow students. When that group decided to sit down and rest, they offered Trinny like, "Hey, do you want to sit down with us and hang out?" But Trinny was like, "No, I want to keep going." So she just went on past them. Well, that same group, as they're sitting there resting, they watched Trinny go down the trail. She's still in eyesight. Then they saw Trinny stop along the trail. She's still in eyesight. They saw her crouch down to look at something like on the right side of the trail. And then they saw her exit the trail going down a hill. So when the group of girls that, Trinny had passed and they had watched her step off the hill, when they got to the spot, they stopped, see, hey, what's going on here? Where do we see Trinny? They noticed there was no place to go. There was no side trail. There was just rock, shrub, and a creek. It really did look like a fun way to walk. Then they had another student approaching from the opposite direction. Basically, they would have passed Trinny if she was going down the trail. So they asked, like, hey, is Trinny up there? Has she passed you? The male student responded no, he hadn't seen her. So the group of girls just carried on back to the bus. They just assumed that Trinny was waiting for them there. 3:30 rolls around and everyone's back on the bus, all except Trinny. Mr. Dunlap does a head count and he noticed he's missing one student. After a few minutes, he realizes, hey, it's Trinny who hadn't shown up yet. Mr. Dunlap then asked Robert, he remembers seeing them together. He's asked him, hey, have you seen Trinny? Robert explained that they stopped at Andrews Ball together to have lunch, but then they split up. So Trinny headed back towards the bus. And weirdly enough, he said he stayed back to chase a bear, but no one hiked back with Robert, so no one could corroborate his story. After a while of waiting, Mr. Dunlap took another male student and began hiking back up the trail to see if they could see Trinny. After no success, they made it back to the bus. So Mr. Dunlap then contacted the forest rangers, and then the forest rangers then contacted the sheriff's department, and the search began. Mr. Dunlap sent the bus driver and all the kids back to Knoxville. He stayed back to assist with the search. When the school bus arrived back to Knoxville, the school officials immediately notified Trinny's parents like, hey, we can't find your daughter. They immediately began traveling up to the Smoky Mountains to find their daughter. By 6:30 p.m., there were 19 volunteers that had begun looking for the missing student. With the trail being so popular, and since she was hiking with others, her sudden disappearance was very strange. The search continued throughout the night, but heavy rains, wind, fog, and even frost conditions rolled in through the night, which made the search very difficult. The volunteers were on foot with dogs. They even searched by air with several helicopters. The dogs did find her scent. It followed it down the trail a ways, but then it ultimately lost her scent. 4 days after the disappearance, they still had no evidence of where she could have gone. The search was then scaled back to 20 volunteers after 4 days. And unfortunately, by November 1st, the search was officially called off. There was another search the following year from April 18th, 1977 to May 5th, but that too was unsuccessful. Trinny was never found. No remains, no clothing, no evidence was ever seen again. So whatever happened to Trinny? What are the theories? Well, there are a few, but here are the most prominent. 1, Trinny ran away. 2, Trinny was taken. 3, Robert Simpson was somehow involved. 4, she simply vanished. This is just another typical missing 411 case. It's a mystery. While there's strong evidence for some of these explanations, every one of them has contradicting evidence. Hence why this is an unsolved mystery. Let's break down each one of these points. 1, Trinny ran away. Since no remains, body, or evidence was ever found in the park, one theory is that she ran away. Near where Trinny had disappeared off the trail, where she stepped off the trail, there was cigarette butts in beer cans. And a short distance through the woods of where she hiked, there was a parking lot. At this parking lot, there was evidence of the same cigarettes and beer cans left on the ground. Trinny could have cut through the woods and met up with a getaway ride. And this could have been her escape. And in fact, one of her fellow classmates stated that's what they thought happened. Also, like I said, there's also contradicting evidence for every one of these theories. For example, Trinny had saved over $1,000 in her bank account from her job at the mall. She also left all of her cash and clothes at home. And after she disappeared, her bank account has never been touched. So this kind of puts a little doubt into the running away theory. Which leads us to theory 2. Trinny was kidnapped by a stranger. This theory is that, that Trinny was just taken. All the same evidence for point 1 still applies. The beer cans, the parking lot, right? So someone could have made that route. However, instead of her leaving voluntarily, she could have been taken. There are some counterpoints though. There's never been a body showing up. There's never been an evidence of a body. There was no evidence of a struggle near where she disappeared. And remember, when she stepped off the trail, her friends were in eyesight. And so they probably would have heard her screaming, probably would have heard her struggle maybe. And this is also a very popular trail. People are traveling up and down it. So kidnapping here would be very difficult. That leads to point 3. Robert Simpson was somehow involved. Trinny had lunch with Robert and then they split up. Trinny was seen after lunch alone. So obviously nothing happened during the lunch, right? The group of girls passed her. They would have noticed something. However, post-lunch, no one can account for Robert. He doesn't have an alibi. He was alone. He could have had time to done something nefarious. There is some evidence that points towards this. One being that, like I said, no one could account for Robert after lunch. Another being that Trinny always kept a thick Stanley comb that was specially made for her and her sister Tina. Well, after Trinny's disappearance, the comb was found in Robert's car. And when questioned about it, all he said was Trinny gave it to him. Also, a side note, Trinny had a star sapphire pendant and a ring on when she disappeared. And they were later found in possession of another girl at her school in her class. And when the girl was questioned, there was nearly no good answer on how she could get them. No one really liked their answer. Another point pointing back towards Robert is when she was missing and after the school had contacted her parents and her parents are traveling up there to assist with the search, Robert had come by her house. He was there with her siblings waiting on the news of what happened. And while there, Robert said to Trinny's sister, quote, "If Kelvin Bowman has Trinny, he will kill her. And if he does not have her, I think she must have run off with some horny hitchhiker." End quote. Now you're asking, Kelvin Bowman? Who the fuck is that? Well, he was another classmate of Trinny. And the year prior, he tried to break into Trinny's house and Trinny's mom shot Kelvin in the foot. Kelvin was arrested and sent to juvie. And while being sentenced, he threatened to harm Trinny when he was released. However, according to the principal, Kelvin wasn't on the trip. He was actually at class that day. So it sounds like he had an alibi and he wasn't, directly responsible. Back to Robert Simpson. It seems like the police and ultimately even the FBI was involved didn't think Robert was involved. He was never charged or anything like that. That leads to point 5, the missing 411 case. Maybe this case is just another missing 411. Strange disappearance in the national forest. No evidence of ever being seen again. Like I said at the beginning of this video, this is kind of a missing 411 case. Not your typical, right? Because there's a couple different theories. But ultimately, we don't know. And it's just a really good mystery and a really good case that I wanted to talk about. To wrap it up, Trinny is still a missing persons case. Most of her family has unfortunately passed away. But it would still be nice to have some answers, at least for her still living family and also her fellow classmates and friends that are still around. What do you think happened? Comment down below. And if you made it this far, I would just like to take this moment and say thank you so much for watching this video. I hope I kept you entertained. If so, please hit the like and subscribe button down below if you want to keep seeing more strange content. Me and my brother here, we're making ghost videos, missing people, obviously, conspiracy theory videos, and all the other strange and just weird content that we like to talk about. Anyway, I hope you had a wonderful day, and I hope I see you next time. Thanks, guys.